Hi, welcome back. It's part 3 of using selection tools in Photoshop and understanding how selections and masks work together. We also talked about being non-destructive because that is the power of the masks. Nothing's ever gone forever. It's just hidden. All right, we're going to delete this smart car that we no longer need that was rasterized. So if you still have that one, I'm just going to drag that layer to the trash can. And then we're going to bring in another picture. So let's go ahead and place another picture from that file folder. We're going to take this eagle picture and place it, and let's just scoot it over to the side. It can hang off a little bit, but it needs to go a little more than half. Something like that is fine. We'll go ahead and hit check mark here. So I'm going to not select anything and just kind of show you how you can use a layer mask just in its really basic form, okay? So I have nothing selected on this eagle layer. I'm going to click the layer mask button down here. Okay, so it gave me my little white layer mask box, which I am now clicked on. Now remember, we can only use one tool on a layer mask. The paintbrush tool. I hope you said that out loud. The paintbrush tool. So no selection tools. I can't go using my magic wand now. Okay, I can't go using my marquee tools now. Once you've added a layer mask, you've now committed to doing this a different way. Now, technically, there are some workarounds that we'll talk about in the last video of the whole series, but for the most part, once we're on a layer mask, we're using a paintbrush, and that paintbrush is going to be solid pure black or pure white. Okay, so I'm on here. I'm going to come and grab my paintbrush tool because that's the tool we use. I'm going to make a pretty good sized brush. Maybe not that big, let's say about 100 or so. And then we want it to be soft. I'm going to drag my hardness down. Maybe now I can go a little bigger because it's so soft. We'll say 140 or so. Okay, so now I've got my brush. So let's say we want to hide this ugly little edge here because we want to make this fade. So we want this picture to fade out and then we can see the picture behind it. You've seen that sort of effect before, right? So what we're going to do is we're hiding this line. So I'm on the eagle's layer mask. I want to hide the line. So I'm going to paint in what color? Black to hide. Okay, here I go. Now, some of these hard edges, notice how, am I painting right over here? No, because that's going to start eating into my eagle here, right? I was staying way out here on the edge. Now remember, this is not a big deal, right? Not a big deal. I'm going to press the X key to switch my color, so now white's on top. And if I start painting, I'm painting it back in, right? How easy is that? Now, notice I've got a little too far here. Now I have a little bit of edge, so I'm going to hit the X button to switch it back. But now I'm going to make my brush smaller. So I'm going to use my brackets by the letter P. Just make my brush a little bit smaller so I can take care of that edge. But I like to start with a big brush and then touch up with a little brush at the end. And not a tiny brush, or you're going to get your blobs won't be as fuzzy, I guess you would say, as you're painting, okay? So all we did was paint straight up on that mask. Just paint it straight up on it, right? All right, now check this out. I'm going to delete this layer mask, and I want you to do it too. I'm going to delete the mask. I'm going to add a new one that's blank. But this time, I'm going to change the color of the mask because why are we seeing the eagle? Because the layer mask is white, right? Because white means we see everything. But what if the layer mask was black? Then what would happen? While clicked on the layer mask, I'm going to press Control I. Control I is invert. I'm going to press Control I, and now my eagle has completely disappeared. So how do I bring my eagle back? Paint with a brush in white. Now I need white on top, so I'm going to press X. I'm just going to start painting. And then look, my eagle's coming back, right? Now I don't have that big of a brush right now, so it's not, see how it's just not as fuzzy and blendy, I guess. Blendy, is that a word? I'm going to use a bigger brush now and just stay over here a little bit. So notice I'm staying way over here, but as I go, it's sort of pushing out a little bit. It's just kind of a trick I use. All right, so there we go. We kind of have it fading from one into the next. So sometimes you want to take that layer mask and begin with a black mask and then paint in what it is that you want to keep. It just depends on the picture. So sometimes we're not even using a selection tool. Sometimes we're just putting the mask on there and we're simply using a brush. So using a really soft brush on a mask is going to give us that blending look, which is kind of cool, right? Okay, now let me go ahead and delete this layer mask yet again. And let's see if we can get rid of this background. So once again, this is a recap from the last one. Magic wand, right? Tolerance, we'll leave it about the middle. I'm going to click one time on the background layer. That selected the background, but we want the eagle. So right click and select the inverse. And then add your layer mask. And there we go. We've got our eagle. Now, do you notice how there's some fringing on this eagle? Some fringing. That means that we could have gotten a little closer, but we were too picky, so it didn't get those blue colors that were sort of blue grayish, right? So remember, I could undo or I could just delete this mask. I could try a higher tolerance number and give it a click, do the inverse, add my layer mask. That's better. I think that's better. And you could continue this process. And if you started to lose areas, like I might be losing this beak here. It's kind of hard to tell, really, because I'm zoomed up so much it's hard to tell. But if I was losing the beak, then I would take my white paintbrush. I probably would need to use a hard paintbrush because I would be getting the edge here. But I could start painting here and I could say, oh, nope, I didn't lose the beak. So switch to black and then just paint it out, which again, remember, painting it out is basically like erasing, right? It's just basically erasing. But it's not erasing permanently. It's erasing temporarily in a non-destructive way. Are you tired of me saying non-destructive yet? Okay. And so that is basically the gist of ways to deal with layer masks very sensitively, using them simply as a clear item that we then paint on, or pressing Control-I, starting with a black layer mask that's hiding everything, and then painting back in the parts that we want to keep. All right, so let's go ahead and hit one more tool real quickly here while we're going. I'm going to place one more image. So we're going to open and place. This time we're going to grab a hold of the airplane. All right, and we'll go ahead and scale it down a little bit. Hold Shift so you don't mess up your airplane, and then sit it down. So this is going to be a very difficult selection, as you could probably imagine. It's not going to be the best thing for our magic wand, but let's just see. If I take my tolerance at 51 and I click, oh boy, right? That's kind of a hot mess, right? If I press Control-D and I go down, you know, it's getting part of it, but it got all of that color. Now, I could stick this on Add to Selection, and then I could like try to grab a hold of this part, and then maybe this part, and just kind of work my way around. But honestly, it's not going to do the greatest job in the world. I'm getting some of it, right? Like, sort of, a little bit of that background. So this is just not the ideal tool for this. Now, I'm going to press Control-D. I'm going to show you a tool that's also not really the right tool for this, but I just want you to see how this next tool works. So we have a tool called the Lasso. The Lasso is what we call a freehand selection tool. So I'm going to zoom up on the back end of this, and I'm going to click on this lasso, and I'm going to sit it on Add to Selection or Unite, and I'm just going to draw. I'm clicking and dragging and not letting go, and I'm drawing down the edge here, okay? And then all you got to do is go back to where you started. Now, like I could go up that edge. Let's say I don't. Let's say I just go here. Then it puts the marching ants around that part. But then I can like start here and go this way. And as long as I end somewhere in there, it adds it in. Okay. So I could add different little pieces of this a little bit at a time, like so, using my lasso. Now, I don't have like the world's most steady hand, although when you're zoomed up really close, you'd be surprised what you can get away with the lasso, and it still doesn't really look very bad. So this was a possible way of selecting this airplane, and I'm not going to make you watch me select the whole thing. But that's the lasso tool. I'll be perfectly honest, I tend to use the lasso tool more after I've used another tool. Okay, so like earlier on when we had the car, and I'll let you sit there and continue to mess with your airplane. And I'll just add a layer mask here. But earlier on, whenever we had the car in there, I was missing the back end of that car, right? Let me open that car and show you one more time. I'll pull this car back in. I'll just leave it big for now. So I'll take my magic wand and I'll select this on the car and I'll invert it, right? But let's say before I take the time to add the layer mask, I can go ahead and get rid of parts I don't need. So I could take my lasso on the minus, on the subtract mode, and I could come around this edge and I could just get rid of these little pieces here, like so. And I could do that now instead of waiting and painting, because sometimes it's easier to just do this in chunks like this than it is to paint it away, okay? And so like it's still going to need a little bit of work when I add my layer mask, but see how it's already like smooth and better down here on the bottom because I used my lasso. So my point here is you can use multiple selection tools. You're not tied to one selection tool. So you might start with your magic wand, but then after you've used, but then Control-Alt-T. I forgot I was in Photo P. It's Control-T in Photoshop, Control-Alt-T in Photo P. But anyway, so you can use one tool and then sit it on Add or Subtract and switch to another tool. And that's how you're going to get good selections. And then if something just isn't perfect, like there's a little white here, then I just click on the layer mask, take a paintbrush, and paint it out. Just paint out the little bitty pieces that aren't perfect. Now, of course, in the beginning, these things are going to take some time because when you start off in Photoshop, you're not going to be really good at this stuff. Like you're going to have to take some time. You're going to have to practice. You're going to have to just do these things over and over and over again to make it better. But that's just the way that goes. You know, that's something that you will get with time. Now, here's the big kicker. Those of you using Photo P, you're pretty much stuck with mostly the ways that I've showed you so far. If I was in Photoshop, there's an extra mode that we can get into that lets us do things just a little bit better. Unfortunately, this mode does not work near as well in Photo P. Okay, so let me just put that on the table. I'm in Photo P right now. So on my airplane, I have this partially done. I have the layer mask added on. There's a button up here called Refine Edge. If you're going to use this button in Photo P, you're going to want to uncheck Anti-Alias. What anti-alias does is it basically blurs the edges, which works fine in Photoshop, but it does not work fine in Photo P, and I don't know why, it just doesn't. But there's a button in here called Refine Edge. And if you have a layer mask, you can refine the edge, and then you can do something with it in Photoshop. But you can see in here, I got nothing going on. Matter of fact, it's completely empty. Okay, so I'm going to go over how to do this using the Photoshop way, which is going to give you more options. And unfortunately, you're not going to have that option if you are using Photo P. Okay, so let me put in, I'm going to place in my airplane. I'll just sit it down. And then let's say that I'll start off with my lasso like I showed you. I'm not going to, again, do the whole thing. I'm just going to do a little bit. But, okay, so like I've started it, right? And, oh, I did not have it on Add to Selection. Never good whenever you're not ready. Bad me. All right, so I've got it started, right? Well, before I add the layer mask, in Photoshop, you can come up and hit the Select and Mask mode. Now, again, that same button exists in Photo P, but it's called Refine Edge, and they don't look the same. Okay, let me move my head out of the way. So let me delete this layer mask in here. I'm going to go through and do the same thing. I'm going to select this a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to hit Refine Edge. Okay, now notice this looks awful over here. See that? It's all blurry. Because for whatever reason, Photo P automatically puts a border of 3 on everything. So I have to take that border off. And then notice it's just like partially see-through. I don't even know why this looks like this. But while you're in this view, you can take a white or a black. It's basically a paintbrush. And you can paint over these areas. So I can take the white paintbrush and paint over this. And see how I can add in more parts of my airplane. Right? As if I'm painting on a layer mask, but it's before we have the layer mask. So I can paint all those parts in here. Let's say I'm done. I'm not, but let's say I'm done. Then I can tell it, okay, make that a mask. I hit OK. and it puts my airplane on a mask. But see what I mean? It's just awful. So this is unfortunately one of those things that Photopea has a button that's similar. It just doesn't work well. Photoshop, I'm going to click on Select a Mask. It's going to open it up, and you can see I can preview it. And you can preview it on different colors over here. So I can preview it like on a black background. I'm going to have to turn up this opacity because I can't see it. So here's like what this would look like on a black background. I'm going to pull this button back so I can actually see the background better, so I can add stuff in. And then it has a paintbrush over here. And it's automatically going to be set to plus, which is like white. And so then I can just start painting, and I got to make my brush bigger. But I can just start painting in and adding in the parts that I need. You also have access to other tools. So like if I click and hold this, I can get to a lasso tool in here. And I can say, okay, well, let's add in this little chunk in here. And you can do all of this from within Photoshop in this little select and mask thing. I can put my lasso on minus, and I can get rid of parts, or I can take my paintbrush and I can put it on minus, and I can get rid of parts or whatever. So it's like a preview that you can keep working on, and then when you're done, if you want to put it out on a mask, down here at the bottom where it says Output Settings, you output it to a layer mask. Just like in Photopea, except this one actually looks decent. I don't have it all done. And the best thing about Photoshop, the next day, I can double click on this layer mask and go right back in here and keep working on this. Unfortunately, we can't do that in Photopea. So this is where we start running into really big differences. These selection tools are where Photopea is just not going to hack it as well as Photoshop. And so as I talk about some of these tools, if you're in Photopea, you're really going to have to think about, you know, sticking with the lasso, sticking with the paintbrushes, and not really worrying about that extra special select and mask view that we have here in Photoshop. Unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the case, but that's just the way it is. Maybe one of these days they'll make it better. Okay, so your task here would be to use your lasso tool, or if you are in Photoshop, you can continue to go in here and use a combination of the lasso or the brush. Don't worry about the other tools because we haven't learned them yet. The combination of the lasso and the brush to add in. Just be sure your output is set to layer mask so that it just continues to update what you have. Up here at the top, I'm previewing it on black. And then you can turn this up to see what it would look like and turn it down so you can see. Now I need to show the beginning of this, so let me put it on onion skin, which lets you see your beginning image, onion skin. And then I can kind of see like what did it look like before, and then I can try to add in those parts. So like if I'm missing this little piece here, I'm on my brush, I'm adding, it always beeps when you do it in here too. And I'm just adding in any parts that are missing. These longer parts, of course, I would zoom up some more and use my lasso. I'm really awful with mouse, so, but anyway, you get the gist of it, and then you would say layer mask, and you just keep kind of adding in little pieces at a time until you get everything that you want. Again, this is not necessarily the best tool for this. I'm just showing you how you can use this tool to do this, okay? So anyway, play around a little bit more with the tools that we've learned so far. Just remember, once we put it on a mask, unless we're in Photoshop where we can double click and go into select and mask, we're stuck using only a paintbrush. So once you've put it out to a mask, you're going to use your paintbrush tool and you're going to zoom up really close and then paint in whatever it is that you need. Okay? You can right click and disable your mask so you can see parts of the mask. And kind of a little cheaty thing you can do is I will disable my mask and then I will take my lasso tool and I will like select some areas like this because that part's not in there. And then if you have areas that are selected, you can take a paintbrush. So now I'm just going to click and turn that back on. You can take a paintbrush and paint in white, right? And it will only paint in that area. Oh boy, I'm missing a whole part of this, right? And then I have to press Control D because I don't want to mess anything up. So I could disable my mask and then like look and see what parts do I not have. I can try to add those in there. And again, I don't know exactly what parts are in here already and what parts aren't. It doesn't matter. Okay, then put it on here. There we go, that's good. And then take a white paintbrush, and it will only, see, it won't let me paint out here. It's not letting me paint out there. It'll only let me paint inside the little marching ants. It'll only let you paint in that area. And then you hit Control D again. And then again, I can disable my mask, go in here, kind of pre-select whatever, turn my mask on so that I can paint it back in, and then paint it in there, and Control D to get rid of those. So it's kind of a long process, but you could do that just using a lasso to predefine those areas that you paint inside of. Okay? All right, I know that was a long lesson. Process all of that, and then play. You need to play a little bit before you move on to the next lesson. So you need to practice with using your layer masks, painting in black and white, disabling the mask, okay? And then, of course, prior to using the layer mask, using either your marquee or your lasso tools or your magic wand and selecting the inverse. So it is time to practice. And you can go get other images and add them to your picture as well.